As you probably know by now, Facebook banned a bunch of people associated with the right. This resulted in Donald Trump tweeting about it. The left threw up their arms saying, oh no, Donald Trump is the InfoWars president. We saw this activist screed from CNN journalists where they complained about Paul Joseph Watson, the extremist. It's all a really strange conversation, but one thing I think that's becoming apparent is that, yes, these platforms are biased. We've heard from Twitter employees, we've heard from Facebook employees. They even have rules on Twitter that restrict conservative perspective on certain ideologies. So yes, we know this. Even Jack Dorsey said on the Joe Rogan podcast, perhaps they were too aggressive in policing the learn to code meme. It stands to reason, at least from my point of view, Republicans are going to lose moving forward. I've even made the argument in the past that if they don't solve this problem, they will lose. Recently in Texas, a state law was proposed, particularly because Republicans in Texas wanted to put an advertisement out that was pro-life, and Facebook said no. To them, a clear bias. If these tech giants have monopolized this space, yeah, Republicans are not going to win ever again. So there's a couple questions. Can Republicans fight back? And why haven't the big mega donors who support conservative ideas stepped into the ring? To address these issues, I am joined by Will Chamberlain, lawyer and publisher of Human Events, who had two really interesting takes on the whole issue. One, arguing that platform access is a civil right, and another article talking about these big mega donors who haven't stepped up. So first, let's talk about platform access as a civil right, but let's begin that conversation by me asking you, what do you think is going to happen to conservatives, Republicans, and honestly, like the reason I'm concerned with this, moderates. We've seen feminists banned, right? If you oppose the regressive orthodoxy of, intersectionality, they'll ban you too. What future do you see if the situation isn't remedied?
Oh, well, I mean, it will become untenable for conservatives to win national elections, and increasingly the conservative movement will become a regional party. The power of social media is both to hijack the media's hive mind and also to provide a space where conservatives can essentially lead on thought and motivate their voters to get out and vote. If the social media platforms constrain and constrict conservative speech and ban effective persuaders and influencers on the right, that's a huge boon to the left in terms of elections. So I don't see a way for Republicans to continue to win elections going forward if they let the left destroy them on social media.
There's actually something really interesting shared with me by there are a lot of companies that want to make what's called OTT, over the top services. So that's like your Roku player, your Amazon. And I saw this chart that shows the 50 plus demographic is still watching TV, but young people are just every day watching more and more online content. So I feel like one of the problems, you have a lot of Republicans who are they're not seeing it because they're not as active online as the younger generation. But you have, so this conversation is being framed now by young people, and the younger moderate conservative and even like old school Democrats from 10 years ago are being called far right. They're being smeared, they're being banned, edgy jokes, even activists on the left who oppose this specific ideology, like Meghan Murphy, the feminist, are getting banned. So to me, it seems like we might not see the ramifications of this for about 10 or 15 years, but if something doesn't happen now, man, conservatives today are not going to exist. So you wrote this article saying that platform access is a civil right. Why don't you explain what you mean by that?
So, I mean, basically, there's kind of two big components to the article. The first is the question of whether or not to frame social media platform access as a civil right as opposed to something else, just about free speech, for example. And then the second is about what exactly could be done by conservatives to protect that civil right. And the civil rights framing, I think, is important. I think it's accurate, first and foremost. When we think about civil rights, we're thinking about those things that the government says to private companies. This is so important that we're not even going to let private companies violate these rights. And usually they're in furtherance of some commitment in the Constitution based on constitutional rights. So the way I see civil rights, for example, the 14th Amendment protects against government racial discrimination, right? That's the equal protection of the laws. The government's not allowed to discriminate against you on the basis of race, sex, etc. But that was already the rule in the 1950s after Brown versus Board. And I mean, that was effectively the rule that governments couldn't do that. But that didn't change the experience for Black people who were, say, driving on a highway through the South. That didn't mean that a private motel had to let you stay in their motel.
That's a real example from your article. You talk about Lyndon Johnson staffers who were struggling to drive to his home.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a shocking anecdote. And I mean, it even woke me up. I remember 10 years ago kind of reading the libertarian arguments against civil rights and entertaining them intellectually. But real life examples like that make you realize that, okay, I guess libertarianism can be appealing in sort of this aesthetic sense of letting liberty in the market solve all these problems. But it's not okay that Black people couldn't go to a restaurant or use a restroom or go to a hotel. That wasn't okay, and the government was capable of making that problem stop. And I think that's the power of the civil rights argument is it says, look, if something's a civil right, we don't have to wait for some entrepreneur to figure out some novel solution to the problem. We don't have to hope that some invisible hand mechanism comes along and resolves the problem for us. We can just use government power and make it stop.
And this is the weirdest thing to me because, I posted this big long thread with all these facts on my Facebook while I was arguing with some like democratic socialist types, and they just completely ignore it and they say private companies can do what they want. And I said, what? I used to hang out with these people who were straight up like, we need to stop these companies from building this oil pipeline. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. I'm like, yeah, we shouldn't let these companies do whatever they want. We want like I believe in a mixed economy, right? You got to have there's got to be market competition, but we do have to try and control things that get out of hand. We've got to have some. So I'm for the mixed economy, but I had a thought on this, right? First of all, my opinion has always been that, like in the instance of the wedding cake, the gay wedding. I understand that's a complicated story because what people tend to miss in that one, if for those that are watching, if you're not familiar, the baker in I think it was Denver, didn't want to make a custom cake for a gay wedding. He said, you can have any cake you want, but I won't do custom work. And it's not as simple as to say that he wouldn't serve them because he was offering them to buy whatever they wanted. It was that they wanted him to produce a specific message. Here's what's fascinating. On Twitter, my understanding is the reason Twitter thinks they have a right to ban whoever they want, it's a First Amendment argument. You can't make Twitter speak, right? Am I correct?
I think that's probably going to be their legal defense. They'll have a First Amendment legal defense to something like this. Sure.
That Twitter has free speech, that they publish, that they're essentially platforming these ideas and they shouldn't be obligated to speak an idea they don't like. But that's a similar argument, in my opinion, to the wedding cake. Now, I don't know if that's what he did, but can you force someone to speak something they don't want to speak? But here's my ultimate thought on the bigger issue and social media. When it comes to a business operating in, say, my town, we all pay taxes. We are obligated to pay taxes. You may think taxes shouldn't be. That's a different argument. By all means, you can have it. We'll talk about that later. But for the time being, if I have to spend money to fund infrastructure, to fund plumbing, to fund electrical power lines and streets, you shouldn't be able to occupy space that I'm contributing to and then restrict my access to it for, arbitrary means. Finding the line of where, what is arbitrary and what isn't is a conversation. Like if I go into your business and start shrieking at the top of my lungs, by all means, kick me out. But if someone comes into your business and happens to be, Muslim, throwing them out's unfair because they did nothing wrong. They're not in violation of any laws, and their taxes contribute to the space you're occupying. So I look at Twitter, and here's what I see. Massive multinational corporations with foreign investment, with extreme power in swaying our laws and our governments. They're hiding money overseas. They're using our infrastructure in our country and then saying, but I can arbitrarily decide who is or isn't allowed to speak. That's terrifying.
Right.
I don't think you should be allowed to use my infrastructure that my taxes contribute to, that I pay for the collective defense too, and you're freeloading on that. Why can you take away my right to legally speak? So that's me.
There's
that's my social liberal argument that I'm surprised the former Democrat types aren't saying.
So, I mean, I kind of want to take that in turn because there's like so much interesting, there's like 3 or 4 distinct interesting arguments there, right? So the first one is, fair enough. But I think I can remember them. I'm a good debater, if I remember right. The first one is about the bake a cake argument, right? That liberals who are perfectly happy to demand that some random baker in Colorado bake a cake for a gay wedding are suddenly yelling, my private company, how dare you infringe on Facebook's rights? Interestingly, I'm a conservative, so the pushback that I get on this article is pushback on, well, what are you saying? Are you saying people should have to bake the cake from the conservatives who, come that angle? And my answer to that is no. I think you can draw a principal distinction between one baker out of 200 million people that bake some cupcakes versus a $500 billion social media company and suggest that perhaps we impose more restrictions and more demands on the $500 billion social media company than we do on random bakers. I think that's a principled position in general. But even so, like, I think the really bizarre case is the one where you say, yes, we should be able to force people to bake the cake. No, how dare we infringe on Facebook's rights? That's insane to me. Clearly, the big threat is the big tech companies.
Yeah, like
Then
what a
you kind
baker
of
does or doesn't do, it's like, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a baker.
Yeah,
but
just go to another baker. It's fine. There's no other Facebook I can go to. There's plenty of other bakers I can go to. Right?
Yep. So it's a monopoly. It's the monopoly of it.
So here's an interesting twist. So you also then made this First Amendment point, right? That Twitter has this First Amendment freedom of association argument that they want to make, that they shouldn't be forced to speak. Well, that position would conflict with their position on Section 230, obviously, because they say they're a platform, not a publisher. Ron Coleman made that point really well, I thought.
Interesting.
Which is, if you're saying you're a platform, then obviously you're not speaking. That's why you're not liable for defamation. So where's your First Amendment argument, bro?
That actually is their argument, though. It was the Jared Taylor case where Twitter argued under the First Amendment they can't be obligated to speak someone else's speech. So
Okay.
So it's clear to me that they're in violation of at least the spirit of the law. They're picking winners and losers. They're censoring certain ads for arbitrary reasons. They seriously, I mean, look, there was a period where I'm scared to even say the word because I know what'll happen when the when the YouTube algorithm, they do a speech conversion and then take the words and then flag your video. But
wow, okay.
A certain device, which is used for self-defense and protected under the Second Amendment, Google actually banned all instances of that word so that you couldn't even talk about anime because there's an anime called Gundam Wing. And those first three letters were censored so the search wouldn't come up. That's insane to me that Google has that power to say you can't even look for this. And now they're suppressing YouTube channels. There's a couple channels that have made a living and built a career for 10 years with Second Amendment protected home defense objects. You see what I have to do to avoid these pitfalls? It's legal.
Right.
It's all legal. It's constitutionally protected. But Google arbitrarily decides what is morally just. That terrifies me. That is evil. Yeah. Like you are not the arbiters of truth, right? And morality.
And here's the corollary. What if it doesn't have to be legal? Like, what if you could use government power to say to Google, you don't get to do that anymore. Sorry. You do that and you censor somebody's video, they can walk into court tomorrow, get an injunction forcing you to undo what you did, and you need to pay the user's attorney's fees. Right. And that's kind of the attitude I want to say. That's the second part of the article, which is the reframe away from the sort of standard conservative approaches to solving big tech censorship and focusing on what is the best end goal for the conservative movement. So kind of, again, and this connects to the idea of generally people are so focused on this publisher platform distinction that I just talked about, right? The idea that, Facebook really is a publisher and it pretends to be a platform. But even if you got that fixed and you got rid of that liability protection, all that means is that you can sue Facebook for defamation. Defamation cases are notoriously hard to win. And that's incredibly indirect because, all that means is somebody else who gets lied about could sue Facebook and punish them financially. But you, the user who's banned, you don't have any recourse. Merely making them a publisher doesn't give you the right to sue them and say, hey, give me my account back. That doesn't change anything. So my point is, if we think of this as a civil right, the right to platform access, then we write laws that say, since it's a civil right, we're going to create what's called a private right of action, which is a new type of lawsuit that says, if Facebook takes away your platform, bans you wrongfully, then you have the right to walk into court. You are entitled to an immediate injunction. You are entitled to attorney's fees, whatever it costs you to get that injunction, and you're entitled to a penalty, statutory damages. So Facebook would immediately have to restore your account, pay you money, and pay your fees.
If you win, though, right?
Sure, if you win, but if you draw the law, broadly and suggest Facebook can only ban you for, say, unlawful speech, right? And unlawful speech, that's pretty well defined. We have a huge corpus of First Amendment law. Judges know how to resolve that and can tell you what speech is lawful and unlawful.
Would Facebook need like a police report or like verification from law to say, yep, we've filed a report about this?
You could write that into the statute, no problem, right? I mean, you could say, here are the list of requirements you need, Facebook. And if you want to lawfully ban an account from your platform, here are the things you must do and the things you must demonstrate in order to not be in violation of this civil rights law, which if you are in violation of is not good for you because it's a really bad time where you just have to pay $250,000 to some random user for their fees and for a penalty.
So here's my fear, right? I don't think I'm going to be banned anytime soon, but I do think I'm, so the way I describe it is like we're all standing on this cliffside, and as the cliff erodes, more and more people fall off. First, first they come for the crazies, then they come for the fringe, then they come for the far right, then the conservatives, then the moderates, then the liberals. It just keeps going. So I'm watching, one by one, people are falling. This is really funny, actually. Oliver Darcy, the CNN journalist who called Paul Joseph Watson an extremist, who has been, furious over InfoWars and all that, interviewed me 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, when I said it's disconcerting the alt-right is getting banned for having bad opinions. So he hits me up. He's like, that's a really interesting, opinion you had on this issue. I'd like to elaborate on this. Writes the story about it. And now his position is totally inverted. Ban them. They shouldn't be allowed on the platform. And it's so damn confusing. But for me, the reason I bring this up is that it was years ago I said, hey man, they banned the alt-right today for having nasty opinions. I get it. I don't want their opinions either. How long until they come for conservatives? How long after that do they come for moderates? And this swing to the far left keeps happening. I made a video about this the other day. I have 3 or 4 charts showing how the Democrats are swinging far to the left. And we've got all these mainstream publications saying it's happening. So if we follow this trek, where do we end up? 10 years? Will there be conservatives on social media? I doubt it. But it's worse than that. It means, I already have to walk on eggshells to talk about basic things. You've got like Sam Harris. Yeah. Sam Harris he does not like Donald Trump. He's a neuroscientist, and he's actually talked about the idea of race and intelligence. How long until that's removed outright and banned, right? So the cliff's eroding. I'm not saying that to like endorse Sam Harris. I'm just pointing out that you'll actually have scientists, and we're actually seeing this with some scientific research being pulled down due to protest. The track seems obvious. Take away someone's right to speak, the ideas can't exist in public, and the Overton window swings ridiculously to the far left unless something's done about it now. So this will be a good point to segue into why aren't these big mega donors doing anything about it? If you want to address anything I just said before we get into that, by all means.
Oh yeah, well, and part of that is why I think the civil rights framing of this issue is so powerful and important. For so long, the narrative has been, well, is this person really a good person? Like, should they really be able to spread their hate speech? And I think the power of the civil rights reframe is you immediately get to say, why are we picking and choosing who gets civil rights? I thought that that's not how civil rights work. We protect civil rights for everyone, even if we don't like what they're using them for. Yeah. And so I think that's a way to just change this whole debate to a high ground. Like, and suddenly people who are fighting against it, if it sticks, and I think it should, I really do believe this should be conceptualized as a civil right. I think that's completely fair framing. But if you're against it, then you're an anti-civil rights advocate. Suddenly Oliver Darcy is for stripping people of civil rights. And I think that, and he might say, oh, that's so unfair. I'm totally pro civil rights. I'm totally pro people being able to access common carriers. Are you? Really? Like, it doesn't seem like it. Seems like all your advocacy is geared towards removing people from the most important communication platforms that they have in their possession. So I think that that's the power of civil rights. And I that's why I think the framing has stuck so aggressively. Like, I've just seen it everywhere.
It's a good idea. You also bring up that really interesting, what is it, like Packingham? Is that the Supreme Court case?
Yeah. Right. I don't
want to get too much into the nitty gritty of that specific case.
Sure.
But the reason I'm sorry to interrupt, but I bring it up because it basically has a Supreme Court saying specifically, social media is cheap, effective, and one of the most ubiquitous tools for public participation.
Right. So the government cannot restrict your access to it. That's what that case stands for. And so if it's that important, all that language, that's civil rightsy language. That's like all about your ability to access the public square and be a participant in society, in civil society. So I think that case assists the framing. It doesn't necessarily prove what some people want it to prove, that current law requires Facebook and Twitter to stop banning people. I don't think that, but it's a useful case in terms of changing the frame to civil rights.
So then it's all a really great idea, but you need power behind you for this to happen, right? You need politicians, but you need funding and resources. And so that's the next article you wrote where, where are these?
I apologize. I do have to clarify, and I should have clarified this earlier. That is actually Raheem Kassam's article. So my editor-in-chief but
My bad, my bad.
I'll take credit for it. It's fine. Raheem won't mind that I take credit for his writing.
I'll
It's all my idea.
I'll put a link to it in the description so you can check it out. But
Okay.
but the idea was really interesting to me because I've constantly heard about Peter Thiel. You know, he went after Gawker. You got the Koch brothers, and you get the Young Turks and the left saying like, oh, the Koch brothers are funding this, that, and this, and it's like, are they? Nothing's happening. You know, will the conversation move fast enough for action actually to happen, and for everyone to have an even playing field for speech and ideas?
I mean, so there's two dynamics I think that are really interesting about what Raheem realized, which is this fact that, hey, all these people are talking about the virtues of risk taking and entrepreneurship and how competition will solve social media censorship, and yet none of them have funded a competitor to Facebook or Twitter. It's all talk. And so there are two things.
And anyone who tries to gets shut out from the market in more ways than one. Financial services, domain services.
Yeah, that's one point, right? So point one is, it turns out that competing with these companies is extraordinarily difficult. Funny thing, right? They try and say that there's no monopoly here, and yet the moment you say to them, well, then try to compete with them, they're like, what do you mean? I couldn't compete with Facebook. That's impossible. How could one, deal with all their problems?
Well, I like the escalating meme of build your own X, and it gets to the point where it's like, build your own financial infrastructure, but then it's like, build your own geostationary network, satellite network for low latency internet in rural areas. Like eventually you get to the point where like, no, you can't. Either public participation is allowed or it isn't.
Yeah, and it puts the lie to these competitive arguments and the sort of complete obliviousness to the idea of natural monopoly and network effects. So that's one part. But then the second part is also just the sort of indifference they've shown to helping conservatives speak. I mean, it really is fundamental indifference. You'd think that if you're going to go out there and spend money on a think tank and have that think tank talk about how competition will solve this problem, you'd simultaneously be trying to, put your money where your mouth is and solve it yourself and demonstrate that you're doing that. Yeah, have some skin in the game, right? Like, why is it okay that for the Kochs, billionaires, to, on the one hand, demand that we not have the government intervene, allow the market to work, and then on the other hand, not spend a dime to do it? Have some skin in the game, guys. Like, if you want to compete against Facebook, put up your money. If you don't, then go away, and we're going to use government to solve the problem. Period.
Maybe that's the big problem, though. I think, Republicans talk a lot about personal responsibility, individualism versus collectivism. On the left, you're going to get high-profile celebrities just saying, here's a blank check. And on the right, you're going to have people saying, well, you're going to have the high-profile individual saying, how does it benefit me? And then you try and explain the long-term advantages of protecting speech and civil rights. And they're going to say, but how do I lower my taxes? How do I, I want to build a factory that doesn't help me in any way, right? In fact, you could even argue that protecting activism online could be bad for big industrialists and certain individuals, right? Maybe they want to be able to go to Facebook and say, here's a little extra fluff, get rid of that person who's protesting me.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the most robust defenses of competition and the virtues of the marketplace are always the people who have completely insulated themselves from competition at nonprofit sinecures. It's really quite obnoxious. These are people who laud the virtues of risk and avoid all risk in their own personal lives. But and that extends not beyond merely their jobs, but also who they'll talk to. I mean, you go down the list, they're constantly trying to distance themselves from the wrong people to maintain their sinecure. It's actually sort of ridiculous.
But that's actually
funny
that's actually interesting though, because that kind of sounds like something Jordan Peterson said about the right drawing a line and the left not drawing a line, right?
Yeah.
That people on the right are like, hey, that's not good. We better get rid of that. We're getting too close. And the left is just like, what's that? Contradictory ideas. We'll just lump them all in together.
Well, I mean, once you realize that the left's principle is not let's have anything abstract other than like we should win and they should lose, then you suddenly realize there's no real internal tension between these arguments at all. We should win and they.
I feel like something I want to bring up, that I've mentioned before, is the censorship kind of has a net benefit effect for the right in that the way I explain it is, imagine you have two kids and you tell one of them they're not allowed to have ice cream. You tell them both, neither of you are allowed to have ice cream. And then you whisper to one, but I'll give you ice cream. The parents show up and they see one kid drenched in ice cream, the other kid looks clean, and they think one kid's messy and one kid's clean, when in reality, you're restricting what the one kid can. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you ban the worst of the worst conservatives and right-wing figures, all that's left are the people wearing suits and ties who are arguing logically and clearly, but the left just runs amok, and you end up with, like Sarah Jeong and other like crazy people posting racist nonsense, just getting away with it.
Right.
Like, Antifa makes the left look just absolutely ridiculous and crazy. But there's a lot of people who just fall in line and support it, and there are people like me who have always been on the left now saying, like, I don't want to have anything to do with those crazy people. Why aren't you doing something about this?
Right. So there is really, and I feel this personally, right? This interesting tension between the principle and the civil rights argument and the sort of ruthless political pragmatism of what would be best for the conservative movement. I mean, yeah, in many ways, the conservative movement is not benefited by, say, Richard Spencer getting the right to speak, or even Laura Loomer getting the right to speak. Like, just from an abstract, if you were solely thinking about how do we win elections, and you were making law solely based on that calculation, you might come down on the side of, actually, yeah, we should restrict some of the crazies, because that would improve our chances. That would mean there was less, it'd be a harder target to hit for the left. And since the left doesn't police their own, we have easy targets going the other direction. But I embrace this position because I think it's the moral thing to do. Also, I think that since we're not in, even more pragmatic, we're not in control of the social media companies. So we don't get to decide when it stops, right? We don't get to say, okay, you've kicked out the worst of the worst. Now you're going to stop and you're just going to let everybody else stay on the platform. No worries. Like, clearly that's not happening. My buddy, my editor in chief, was suspended from Facebook 3 days ago on basically, call it the Meghan Murphy grounds, right? Men are not women. That argument, which I personally never express anymore, because not necessarily because I wouldn't want to talk about it, but because I'm aware of the sort of Damocles hanging over all of our heads.
Exactly. And that's another extremely nightmarish thing, is you're gonna have people who are self-censoring because, that's a great analogy, the sword of Damocles. Facebook could just be like, you're gone, bye.
Yep.
Like, I look at Paul Joseph Watson's videos, and sure, there are a lot of offensive videos. I don't watch a ton of his content, so I don't want to act like I know him perfectly. But I do know he's got like the failures of modern architecture and stuff. So it's like, that's weird. But I think it's the affiliation with InfoWars that ultimately gets him out, because they're just getting rid of all of it. So anyway, I don't want to go on too long, so I'll just ask you one more question. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of state laws popping up. Florida's failed, I believe. It's permanent, indefinitely postponed. Yeah. Texas wants to pass this law that says if you claim to be unbiased, then you must act in that way. And California, today, they're doing a third reading that would, restrict censorship on for social media companies. What do you think is going to happen? And do you think, what do you think is going to end up happening, right, with these state laws and what's?
So, I mean, I don't know about any individual state law, but I am a big proponent of the idea of focusing sort of grassroots energy on state level legislation to create consumer protection laws protecting their citizens from being censored by social media companies. Because I don't see, federal is going to be really hard. Congress is in the hands of that, the House is in the Democrats' hands. I don't think they want to help us. But there's plenty of states that have completely Republican legislatures who have plenty of conservative citizens in their states who want to be protected from Facebook and Twitter coming in and ruining their lives. I mean, this is not uncommon. States have consumer protection laws all over the place.
But here's the issue. I mean, Washington, D.C. protects political affiliation, right? And source of income. Twitter and Facebook, they've manipulated, restricted, and banned people specifically for political affiliation. And I'm not talking about hate speech. I know there's going to be people on the left saying, like, no, it's because of hate speech. No, I'm not going to name any of these specific groups, but they're political parties associated with fringe extremist ideologies. And whichever one you're thinking of, trust me, there's more than one. They've been completely removed. Why hasn't DC come out and said, like, can't do that, right? Because I mean, will they have to abide by local jurisdiction if they want to operate within those boundaries on those computers?
So that actually brings up a really interesting point. Again, why it's so important to take the focus to writing a statute that gives citizens a private right of action, as opposed to relying on regulators ex ante to solve the problem for you. Most people, when they think of laws, they're like, oh, it's going to be Lois Lerner. It's another very common argument. Lois Lerner will be the one regulating your speech rights. You don't want that. It's like, no, I agree, I don't. So I want to draw up a law that instead gives the user the right to go to court to force the company to comply with the law and give them their account back. And that's doable. There are plenty of cases where you can do it. So that's how you avoid the problem of regulators kind of looking in the other way at laws they don't really want to enforce. It's harder for judges to do that because they know they have an appellate judge sitting above them who's going to criticize them if they decide to butcher the law.
Well, I will wrap up with one final thought. I don't know if you have anything you want to add before we end. Well, thanks for coming on. I will point out, it's weirdly enough, Will is on my channel like more often, and it's probably because you're a lawyer and you're talking about a lot of similar things I do. So when I see this article, I'm like, that's actually one of the most forward-thinking arguments put forward yet. We see a lot of the people saying the same thing, like, don't ban me, and then you come out like, here's a civil rights argument, here's precedent, and so I'm like, that's a really important conversation. I will say that, I think it should be obvious to everybody at this point, there is going to be self-censorship. There are people who have been banned from YouTube without even breaking any rules, and I mean it. Like Monkey Jones channel, he's in edgy jokes where he mocked Elliot Rodger. They just took him out. No questions. No. Just boom. He didn't even get any strikes. They just erased his channel. So unless there is some right to access, we either, in my opinion, have to recognize the damage being done by these massive monopolies. They control way too much. They're controlling commerce. They're starting to, we've got MasterCard controlling transactions and Visa. PayPal controlling 60-70% of online transactions, Stripe. Then you've got the Amazon controlling commerce online. You've got basically all of it. And then you've got Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube controlling speech. It's like maybe there's a point we should realize the commons are under threat. And my mind is blown that I'm actually talking to a conservative about this problem and solving it instead of liberals. But I will be talking to, tomorrow, I'm doing a live stream with David Pakman about this, which is going to be really great. I think Dave's pretty good, and we were having some Twitter exchanges, so that's going to be fun. So I'll just wrap it up there. You guys can follow me on Minds at minds.com/Timcast. New videos every day at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll have more videos on my second channel, youtube.com/TimcastNews. Will, do you want to mention where people can find you?
Yeah, so I'm Will Chamberlain on both Twitter and Periscope, but more importantly, we just launched a brand new, not brand new, the oldest conservative magazine in existence. We just relaunched it, Human Events, www.humanevents.com. We're trying to put out beautiful, really in-depth, interesting commentary and news, and I think if you guys take a look, you will enjoy it.
I will put the links to the two articles, one from Will and one from Raheem, in the description below. You can check it out. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.